Okay, we're about to hear from Paul Karr and Bryton Stoll about the IRS Form 5695, the tax credits, residential tax credits that are still around. We think this is all this, everything's in flux, as everybody knows, and also advances in home energy audits. So I'm going to let him take it away now, Paul.
All right. Well, thanks. I'm going to start off, and I thought everyone likes to hear a story, so we're going to start with once upon a time. So about 5 years ago, my wife and I were living out in Manhattan, and in the winter of 2020, so we just had a cold snap last week. Well, we had a cold snap in Manhattan, and we survived the cold snap. Um, but I say survived because our high efficiency propane furnace would not stay running. So remember the TV show Lost? The survivors had to go and press the reset button right on time, or else the end of the world would come. And so I was like the guy on Lost. I had to go to the basement and kept hitting the reset button to keep the unit running over the winter. And I've got a little video here. The there's a video here of the burner firing, so it would fire up nicely and nice blue flame there. But the I'd call the HVAC technician to come out and take a look at it, and his diagnosis was the modulating gas valve on this brand is well known to be a piece of crap.
Hmm.
And you can't really replace it. You need to replace the whole system, and that'll cost you about $12,000. And so that was a shock to the system. And maybe some of you have heard that from a tech before, and you don't know if you can believe them or not. Are they just trying to sell me equipment, or could I actually call someone else out here? Maybe they could fix it. I don't know. But that was way more than I expected. So here you're going to see, here's where the fan turns off and the flame rolls out. Not a very, then it kicks off. And so that was doing this quite frequently throughout the winter. So I knew that I didn't want to spend $12,000 on a new system that was just the same as what was coming out. So um, I thought maybe it was an opportunity. Maybe it's an opportunity to put in something better. And so in the summers, we had been experiencing really high electric bills, like over $400 to cool the house. And we had become friends with one of the neighbors in our neighborhood. He was the owner of the propane company. And we were friends, but still calling him to come refill our propane tank for over $1,000 was always a traumatic experience. Um, so I asked the first guy, what would it cost to put in a heat pump? And his answer was, oh, I wouldn't do that. He said, heat pumps can't handle our Kansas winters. You'll be calling me in 9 months complaining that it's just too cold. So I said, humor me. So he checked with his supplier because he didn't even know what it was going to cost. And he reluctantly came back with a quote of $22,000.
Whoa.
So meanwhile, a cousin of ours with a similar sized house had recently boasted that his electric bill had been as low as $35 with their ground source heat pump system. It was super quiet, was very comfortable, and even was even able to preheat his domestic water. So what you see pictured here is a nice schematic of a ground source heat pump. And so if you haven't heard of this, many of you in this, if you're watching this video, you probably have heard of this, but it uses the earth as a huge heat sink. And it maintains relatively consistent condenser temperatures throughout the seasons. And so I knew I kind of wanted to do this, and I mentioned it to my friend, the propane supplier, and bless his heart, he laughed uncomfortably and said, "Oh, well, I've heard those systems really aren't worth it." I knew better, so undaunted, and with the support of my very patient wife, we started the journey to a more efficient home. I reached out to the guy that installed my cousin's system, and I had to wait for an appointment because he was very high in demand. But we finally came out. He quoted me $30,000. And then we're going to drill 200 foot deep wells and install this kind of system. At the time, there was a 26% tax credit that brought that down to 22,000, which was now comparable to the high efficiency heat pump and furnace I had been quoted for the air source. I still had to come up with the $30,000 cash up front, though. And he also warned me that they would really destroy our yard, so factor in some landscaping repairs. So we decided to do that. And we called them out and got on the schedule. Had to wait months for this to happen because they were high in demand. And you have to wait on the weather too. So rainy spring season's not a good time because they got to pull this huge rig out into your yard. And they drilled four wells to the side of the house here. And talk about destroying the yard. They definitely did do that. So I had expected that I would just clean up the mess with my hand shovel, but no, it ended up being a lot worse than I thought. But there you can see on the left-hand picture the four yellow bags. Those were the tops of the four wells that they drilled. And before we knew it, we had our beautiful new water furnace system in the basement, took the place of the furnace, and the little side um, uh, Super D heater, the heating the hot water on the side, and a new electric tank. And we got it put in. I was very proud of this. Now, we never really saw an electric bill as low as $35, unfortunately, maybe $100. But I still have the inner satisfaction that we made a smart decision. Now, this screen here is pretty interesting. This was how the system looked. Let me turn on my pin here. So this was, we'd gotten the system put in the fall, and this screenshot was taken on February 16th, and I was worried because this loop temperature throughout the winter had been dropping. It started around in the 50s, but the loop temperature is what the temperature of the loop down in the earth is on those 200-foot wells, and that temperature kept dropping and dropping. And I was worried that at some point we were going to reach freezing. And so I had called the installer, and he goes, "Oh, we'll put antifreeze in it. Don't worry, we'll get out there and do it." And they finally came out and did it in February. So that's what this note was. But they installed the antifreeze on February 16th, and this loop temperature never got below freezing. Some other interesting things. It was -7 degrees out the day that I took this screenshot. And the electric auxiliary heat never kicked on because the condenser temperature was still able to use the heat pump at 36.6 degrees. The total energy being drawn at the moment I took the snapshot was 2,600 watts, which is about 11 amps. So definitely a great energy saver. We're able to heat the house on 11 amps basically at this moment. So that was pretty neat. We were pretty excited about that. Let's see, how do I turn this off? Okay, and then this was the young man, the young college student I hired to come out and fix our yard after it was done. So some things I learned from this experience. First, the expected energy savings really was an educated guess based on what my cousin had told me. In hindsight, I should have found an energy auditor to perform the energy model with accurate energy savings predictions and not just rely on anecdotal evidence. So that was one thing I learned. But at the time, I didn't really know anything about energy auditors. Secondly, the buying decision was ultimately an emotional one. And I think if those of you out there who are in sales of any kind, you probably recognize this, that people buy ultimately, they make the buying decision based on an emotional decision usually. I used the potential energy savings and the tax credit to justify what I already wanted to do in my gut, but might have done it even if the financial picture didn't pan out. So trust your instincts, but verify. Perform due diligence to make smart decisions for yourself and your families, because not all upgrades live up to the expectations. Another thing I learned is we sold the house really the very next year. And so the appreciation on the house helped pay for the upgrade when we sold. The 22,000 we spent just sort of disappeared in the mix during the real estate transaction. We sold the house for significantly more than what we originally paid. And analysis don't take into account the general appreciation of real estate value. Investing in your home as a general rule is almost always a good choice. Next thing I learned is do your own research, trust your instincts, and seek out competent allies. If I had listened to the original HVAC tech or listened to my friend who ran the propane company, I might have settled for the status quo and been disappointed. I ultimately suffered no buyer's remorse, knowing that the system we chose was the right one. And maybe the last thing I learned is that doing the right thing can be hard. Changing the system, drilling wells, waiting for contractors, even repairing the landscape, and then having to apply for the rebates and tax credits after the fact was a lot of work, but it was also a lot of fun. And those of you on this call probably enjoy this kind of stuff as much as I do. So even though it's a lot more work, it's fun, so go for it. So that's what I learned about that experience of installing the ground source heat pump system. And I used the tax credit to help pay for it. So let's talk about the tax credit specifically. Bryton, you want to take it from here?
Yes. So I realized that we should probably mention, by the way, we are Endeavor Home Performance. We do energy audits, HRES ratings, energy code compliance, new homes and existing homes all over the Kansas City area. Paul here is our energy auditor. So I wanted to make sure that he got to talk about some of the fun stuff like the actual energy audit itself and the stories and whatnot. And then I'm going to be the boring one that talks to you just about tax credits and tax laws. But if you think about it, it could be fun because, we're just trying to figure out how to pay less taxes. That's the fun part. Uh, so the tax credits for your existing homes fall under two names. There is 25C, 25 Charlie, and 25D, 25 Delta. They get kind of separated into three buckets, but we will get to that. 25C and 25D they've been around for a long time. But it's something that just kind of kept getting, is it going to end? Oh, and then the Congress extended it. Is it going to end? Congress extends it. The Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 actually set it up to where these things should be around for at least 10 years. The Inflation Reduction Act runs through 2032, so it should be a safe bet, but who knows? So that is a fair warning that Congress can always take it back. But the way it stands, it is not going to expire until 2032. So we are talking about tax credits here. We're not talking about tax deductions, which is good news because we're not deducting from the amount of income that you owe taxes on. We are just taking the amount of taxes you owe and knocking off a certain amount of money. So if you have a $1,000 tax credit, you owe $1,000 less dollars in taxes, which usually means your tax return is $1,000 higher. But it is something to keep in mind that if you don't owe any taxes, then a tax credit doesn't do you any good because a tax credit only decreases your tax liability until you hit zero. They are not going to pay you. They're just going to have you pay them less. I think that covered that slide. And that first note there, that goes right along with it, so you don't have to itemize your deductions because this is not a deduction; it's just a tax credit. You will instead complete Form 5695, take the number from 5695, put it on your 1040, and that tells you how much taxes you owe in the end. And of course, tax day is April 15th. So I mentioned earlier that we have these two names, 25C and 25D, but they actually kind of fall into three buckets. So we've got them separated into the three buckets here, and we're going to go into them into each bucket in more detail. So let's start with 25D. 25D, you can kind of think about this as this is the big stuff, the big expensive stuff like Paul was just talking about. 25D is a 30% tax credit. So you get 30% of the money that you paid. Basically, that's how much money you take off of your tax liability. So essentially, it made whatever you're buying 30% cheaper. The big ones here are ground source heat pumps, aka geothermal, what Paul just talked about, solar panel systems, and whole home batteries. There's also small wind turbines and fuel cells. I'm assuming those are a lot less common. But the big ones here are going to be ground source heat pumps, solar panels, and batteries. You get an automatic 30% back on your tax credit. So if it's a $10,000 purchase, you're going to get a $3,000 tax credit. There is no limit on the amount. You can keep getting 30% back until you have reduced your tax liability to zero. These are the other tax credits we're going to talk about. They have caps on them. So they are also, all of these are 30% tax credits, but the other ones have caps. So important to know. Another important distinction between this tax credit and the other tax credits is that this tax credit qualifies on a new home. If you are building a new home, you can also get this tax credit. If you are building a new home, the others, the 25C credits, do not apply. You can't get those. Instead, you need to look at 45L, and that is a different presentation. So let's go on to the next bucket. That's 25D. Those are the really big ones. Now we're on to 25C, and this is kind of the first bucket of 25C, and it's kind of a hodgepodge. It covers a lot of stuff. Insulation's probably the biggest one that you're going to remember here. But again, this is a 30% tax credit. So you get 30% back on what you bought, up to a total amount on everything here, $1,200. You absolutely cannot get more than $1,200 out of this bucket. So if you spend $4,000 on insulation, boom, $1,200. You no longer get any more tax credits for also buying windows or doors. So the total max is $1,200, but then there's also these like smaller buckets that have maximums within them. So you'll see that the first the first one there, windows and skylights, you can only get $600 back on windows and skylights. On doors, $250 for each door, $500 max on doors. So if you went ahead and bought however many windows and skylights and you maxed it out, you got to your 30% got up to $600. Now you're maxed out on windows. You also bought 2 doors and got $250 each from those. Now you're maxed out on your doors. You have a total of $1,100. And now on everything else in this category, you can only get 100 more because the total max is 1,200. So again, you can see the categories there: windows and doors, insulation. That's the big one, right? If you're gonna buy some insulation for your walls, attic, whatever. This is kind of a legacy one, so you'll see in the next category, we're going to get into like electrification and heat pumps, but this is where all the other HVAC stuff goes: air conditioners, furnaces, and like normal water heat, basically the normal stuff, the stuff that isn't on the newer side. And also, big important one, you can get a 30% tax credit for an energy audit up to $150. So that's another one of those where the max for the audit is $150, but then let's say you bought an energy audit, you got $150 on that. You also bought some insulation and got $1,050 on that, congratulations, you maxed out your $1,200. It is something to keep in mind, though, that if you go ahead and get, an energy audit from us or someone else, and you can get your $150 back for our energy audit, but that is going to cut into the total amount you could get back for the insulation that you go ahead and put in, because that's what was recommended. So it is something to keep in mind. You can game the system a little bit by splitting things into separate years. So this is not like a lifetime maximum. This is a maximum of each year. So you could do your energy audit here in 2025, and get your $150 back on your 2025 taxes. And then you could do your big insulation project in 2026 and get your full $1,200. I wouldn't necessarily recommend waiting 10 months to do your project, because who knows if it'll actually get done. But that is a way to get a little more money out of the tax credit. Let's go on to this last bucket here. This last bucket is also the 25C credit, but it's a whole separate. You can think of it completely separate from what we just talked about. The maximum on the other bucket was $1,200. The maximum on this bucket is $2,000. So in total, with the two buckets, the 25C tax credit can get you a maximum of $3,200 in 1 year. And the way that you do that is heat pumps or biomass stoves. Heat pumps and heat pump water heaters are going to be the big ones. So an air source heat pump, again, it's 30%. The maximum is $2,000. It does have to be a high efficiency heat pump. So that is something to keep in mind. Not every heat pump counts. It does have to reach a certain efficiency level. So generally it's going to be on the more expensive side, which means if you go ahead and buy a heat pump that qualifies for this tax credit, you are probably maxing out the 30% at $2,000. Keep in mind that if you are going to replace a heat pump and a heat pump water heater in the same year, with just the heat pump alone, you've probably already maxed out your $2,000. You're not going to get anything for the heat pump water heater. That's another place where maybe you go ahead and split up the years. Then again, it's annoying to have a project that drags on that long, right? So heat pump water heater, exact same thing. It's a 30% tax credit up to $2,000, but that would be a really expensive heat pump water heater, so you're probably not going to max it out when you do a heat pump water heater. Something that I forgot to mention on the other bucket, that's important for this bucket and the last bucket, the 25C bucket, both 25C buckets. Labor is not supposed to be included. This is for materials. So you're supposed to get a tax credit on the heat pump, not necessarily a tax credit for installing the heat pump. Same thing with insulation. You get a tax credit for purchasing insulation. You do not necessarily get a tax credit for the labor of someone installing your insulation. So in the end, on 25C, you can get up to $1,200. On 25D, or excuse me, you can get a total max of $3,200 because you can get $1,200 and $2,000. On 25D, you can get, well, there is no maximum. You can get 30% of whatever you pay. I saw someone in the chat there asked about battery systems. Yes, battery systems. Can we go back a couple slides, Paul? Battery systems fall under 25D. So you can get 30% of your battery system back on a tax credit, and that has no limit. There are some requirements. I think it says under there, I got my thing in. Yeah, the battery that you purchase has to be at least 3 kilowatt hours. So can't just be buying car batteries to strap into your house. You actually have to buy a Tesla Power or something like that. Generally, those are being installed by the same folks that are doing solar panels. Maybe not always, but generally those are being done by the solar panel folks. So the good news is they understand the 25D tax credit. So let's go on to the forms. I don't necessarily think we need to bore you and go through this really slowly. Um, hopefully either your accountant is doing this or you're using TurboTax or Free Tax USA. If you're doing those things, it's going to fill this form out for you. But let's go through it real quick, just so that you understand how this actually ends up on your income tax return. So here you got the 1040. That is your overall income tax return. You'll see there under tax and credits, that is where you're going to put the number that says this is how much credit I got from my 25D and my 25C credits. So I think you start with Form 5695. That's for energy efficiency tax credits. You take a number from there and put it on Schedule 3, and then you take the number from Schedule 3 and put it on 1040.
I don't know what the windows we got
I'm sorry?
in the door.
Let's see. Here in here.
Not on there.
I think so.
That's accidental.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so let's move on to the next one here. Oh, there you go. There's specifically the energy efficiency ones going on that Schedule 3 of the 1040. I would like to get down to 5695. That is the residential energy efficiency tax credit form, the really exciting stuff here. Again, if you got an accountant, let them handle it, or your chosen software. But this is how it ends up working. So the first portion here, the part 1, that's 25D. That's what we just talked about. That is the 30% tax credit, no cap. This is solar panels, geothermal, batteries. And you'll see right there, we just spent $20,000 on our solar panels. We spent $30,000 on our geothermal heat pump. And you'll see that this one does not have a maximum. So we spent $50,000 total. We can get 30% of that $50,000 back. So we get our $15,000. This is kind of a continuation of the same thing here. You go down. Did you buy solar? Did you buy fuel cells? Did you buy geothermal? We ended up, in our example here, we ended up with $15,000. I believe the residential clean energy credit limit, correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, but the point of this form is to figure out if you are getting down to 0 taxes.
Yeah, so line 14 there says you enter the amount from the residential clean energy credit limit worksheet. So what you see on the right side there is the worksheet, and that comes out of the instructions. So that line 1 is $20,000. That was your tax liability. That came from 1040, and that's just an example. And then you have to subtract out all these tax credits that you may have claimed earlier to arrive at that tax bill. So in this case, we started with 20,000. We're subtracting out the 3,200 that we're going to get from the other energy upgrades. We're going to subtract 2,000 that was mortgage interest credit and so forth. And we get to the bottom, and 14,800 is the number that we then enter on line 14. That is the limitation. So even though we got a $15,000 tax credit for our geothermal system and our solar panels, we're limited to only taking 14,800 this year.
Yeah, basically what this worksheet is saying is how much taxes do you owe? How many tax credits did you get? And did you get to 0? Did you get to the point where you don't owe taxes anymore? And are we reaching a point where we actually have more tax credits than we have tax owed? So on line 16 there, Paul, that we get a difference of $200, and on the 25D tax credits, or this was actually something that I wasn't sure of. Does this count for all of these tax credits can be carried forward?
Just on the 25D. So the $200 there that was left on the table. We don't have to kill it. We can save it for next year.
Got it. So this is important to know on 25C. I don't think you can carry those forward, correct?
Right.
Right. So
But you get to
those
take them again the next year if you do work. So in this case, the $15,000 that we spent on solar and geothermal came out about right. But if we'd spent another 20 grand on batteries, then we wouldn't have been able to take the credit this year. We'd have to wait a whole nother year to get it.
is there a maximum amount on your carry forward?
I don't believe so. Nope.
Got it. So that's the good news about 25D. If you're worried, well, geez, these dollar amounts are so high. If I buy geothermal and solar panels in the same year, I'm going to spend $50,000. I may not owe enough taxes to get full advantage of the tax credit. That's why 25D can be carried forward to the following year, whereas the smaller ones, 25C, not so much.
Right.
David is asking if 25D includes labor as well as materials, or is it like 25C that's only materials?
It's the whole system. So it would include the labor.
Yeah.
Okay.
That sounds right. I couldn't remember that for 100%. But that makes sense, and it's something to keep in mind. When you're talking to your HVAC contractor, if it's a geothermal, so the way we're understanding it there, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're talking to your HVAC contractor and you do geothermal, they can you can get a tax credit on the labor and the actual equipment. But if you are going to try to get your 25C $2,000 max tax credit on that heat pump, then it is equipment only and not the installation, I believe.
In the case of my geothermal system, I was told that I could also include the cost of the landscape repair in that because it was part of the entire system.
That's good to keep in mind. There might be some ways to I'd be curious how obviously it's do it at your own risk and whatever you and your accountant decide to do, but I wonder if there's anything similar to that with like, well, I needed to work on my roof a little bit while I was doing my solar panels.
There's some specific verbiage in the instructions that you would want to visit on that stuff.
Would
So
now be a good time for us to provide our legal statement that we are not accountants and you are in charge of your own taxes.
yes.
I was just going to suggest that. Yes.
So now we're on to part 2. We are on to this is the 25C. So you saw we were on part 1. That's 25D. Part 2 is 25C. And you'll see all those categories that we mentioned. They provide you a place to put in the amount of money that you spent on each of those things. So right here, we've put in $5,000 we spent on insulation. So then 18B is saying, well, what's your maximum tax credit on that? It's $1,200.
This might be a footnote here. If you read 18A right there, it says enter the cost of insulation material or system, including air sealing material or system. And so I've talked to insulators who will say, we're putting in an insulation system. And so they don't necessarily itemize their invoice. You just get charged, say, $5,000. So that includes labor and materials, but they're calling it an insulation system. So this is a case where definitions of what words mean probably comes into play there.
And again, we are not accountants or lawyers. This is not legal advice. So then you'll see 19A there. We spent $1,000 on our doors. 19B is that's on the most expensive door you bought. So that is each individual door. We bought one $1,000 door. You can't get more than $250 per door. So we put $250 there. And the cost of the other qualifying doors, we spent $1,000 on the rest of the doors, which means we can get a max of $300. And we maxed out our $500 max, right? Because we had the possibility to go up to 550, 250 plus 100. But the maximum on doors is 500. Now you'll see, frankly, if you are filling this thing out yourself and you bought insulation that was $5,000 and you already maxed out your $1,200, congratulations. I'm glad you paid attention to the presentation. You may not bother to fill out the rest because you've already maxed out your $1,200. So you'll see 18B, 19E, we've got our $1,200. We've got our $500. I'll bet you we're going to get to a point here at the end where it's going to say, do not say more than $1,200. You see the windows there. We spent $10,000 on windows, but you can only get $600 back maximum. So, off to the right side, basically we're maxing out all these tax credits. Spent $6,000 on an air conditioner. $600 max on the air conditioner. Spent $5,000 on we really went to town on this house. This is nice. So again, we're hitting all of those category maxes on the right column. We're hitting all of those category maxes. 600, 600, 500, energy audit, 150. But when we add everything up, add all those lines together, everything we just said there, all those maxes, and we get 4,250. That is the theoretical amount that we could get. No, we can't. The maximum is 1,200 for this bucket. So you'll see there, it says, add all the lines together. We got 4,250, and then it says, add, take that number or $1,200, whichever's smaller. So $1,200. Now, so we're through, once we get to line 28, we're through that second bucket, that 25C, the hodgepodge bucket. And now we're on to the third bucket, 25C, the heat pumps and heat pump water heaters and biomass stoves. So we spent $6,000 on this heat pump water heater. We've maxed out our tax credit of $2,000. And then so we maxed out the entire max of 25C again is the total of 3,200. We're going to go look at the tax liability worksheet again to see if we can actually use the 3,200. If you remember from looking at the worksheet before, Paul had already put that 3,200 in.
This worksheet is a little different. It has
it's a different worksheet. Okay.
Yeah, it's a different worksheet, so it spits out a little bit different answer. But there's no carryover in this category.
Right. Yep. The long story short there being that I'm assuming that worksheet is we're making sure that we actually have the tax liability to take the money, right? So we said we owe $20,000 to the government, which means we can take our $3,200 tax credit. If we only owed $2,000 to the government, then we cannot get a $3,200 tax credit. So in the end, now we're back to the beginning. We take the number from 5695. We put it into the Schedule 3. And then from the Schedule 3, you do some addition, and you end up putting that final number there on 1040. So we are saying that we got a total of an $18,000 tax credit. Is that right?
Yep.
Awesome. Saving money. Oh, and I remember that was because we had 15,000 from our solar panels and our ground source heat pump. We had a total of 3,200 from insulation, heat pumps, etc., which is a total of 15,200. But We didn't have enough tax liability for that, so we carried over 200. Or excuse me, that was 18,200. But we didn't have enough tax liability for that, so we got a tax credit of 18,000. We're going to carry forward $200 to next year. The math is lining up. Did we make it through the boring tax credit part?
Yeah.
So
Any questions on this part?
that's what I was going to say too.
think
So
we
far,
answered the
I don't think there's
Oh,
Nope.
sorry.
no more questions
Okay.
at this time.
I think the most important thing to remember is those buckets. The maximum numbers. Easy thing to remember: the 25D, no maximum. Heat pumps, 2,000. Everything else, a maximum of 1,200. Once you get down into those, like the individual buckets of like doors, windows, furnaces, air conditioners, insulation, energy audits, those do get more complicated. And as our in-house energy auditor, Paul would love to help you with that.
Well, speaking of energy audits, so the next part of this is to share with you some of the advances in home energy audits. So the technology is just getting better all the time. And so when we do energy audits, we use software that does energy modeling of an existing home. And so some of the things it can do is here on the left, comprehensive modeling. So the software can model everything from the basement insulation to the rooftop solar and everything in between. So we're basically building a model of the house inside the computer software. It's able to model HVAC, anything from heat pumps, furnaces, boilers, really just about anything. And then what we can do is we can add, remove, and upgrade multiple systems. The software we also use does utility bill calibration. I'll talk about that in specifics here a little bit later, but it uses the actual energy that the house used over a 12-month period and calibrates the model to that, so it makes it more accurate. And some of the rebate programs that are coming out from the federal government are going to require this BPI 2400 calibrated models for those rebates. The audit should calculate the savings, show accurate monetary savings, carbon dioxide savings, perhaps, for different upgrades that you might do on your house. So if we're going to add X amount of insulation, how much money is that going to save us? Combustion appliance testing. So when we go into a house, we'll do carbon monoxide testing, and the audit ought to include that in the reporting. Test in and test out procedures. Maybe we go into a house and we test in, say here's what the numbers were when we tested in, and then after we completed the improvements, we tested out, so we could actually calculate how much did the energy model actually improve after we made the adjustments. So those are all things that we want to include in the energy audit. So an example of an energy audit. So say we get a call, someone wants us to come out and do an energy audit, and they give us the address of the house, and we set up a time to come do the audit. First thing I do is I go to Google and take a look at the house. And so this house looks like just a typical suburban house in kind of an older part of Overland Park, for example. Looks like just a ranch. In this case, there was a driveway that goes up to a fireplace. So I know right away this house probably got a remodel at some time where they converted the garage to a room. So that's kind of interesting. But it looks like a pretty plain house. But I'm going to zoom out, sky view, and this house is a lot more complicated than you might have thought from the front view. So I'm making notes in my head like, oh, I see there's a detached garage on the back of the, a different driveway back there, but it's connected to the house. There's a couple different additions. So I realized, okay, this house is a little more complicated than I thought. We're going to go out to the house and we're going to build a floor plan. This house, we're going to measure it and create a dimensioned floor plan. And with that, we're going to create a 3D model. So we use SketchUp in our office to create 3D models. It helps us to calculate what are all the areas. So how much wall surface area do I have? How much attic surface area do I have? How many vaulted ceilings do I have? And what is the surface area of those? How big are the windows? What direction is the building facing? Because it makes a difference which direction the sun is coming in. We do a blower door test to figure out how leaky the house is. We can test HVAC efficiency. Here's an example. We'll crawl up into the attic and see how much insulation is up there. And I'll just give you a little quiz. What's the R value of that insulation in that attic? Say I stuck a tape measure down in a random place and I measured 12 inches. What do you think the average R value of that attic is? It's a little hard to say, isn't it? So it's thicker in some places, it's shallower in other places. We've got some gaps here and there. So as the auditor, what we do is we try to figure out what is the average. So I'll take measurements in several different places, and maybe I decide, well, it was R30 in some areas, or R20 in others. So I'm going to say it's maybe an average of R25. And this is where the utility bill calibration really helps us. I'll explain why later. We'll take a look at the ductwork. Is it leaky? We can test how leaky the ductwork is. We're looking at model numbers for all the HVAC equipment so we can know how efficient they are. Here's what kind of water heater are they using. Here's a blower door that measures how leaky the house is. So we take all that information and come back to the office and plug it into our energy model. So in this particular house, we plugged all that information in, spit out this is one of the pages from our report. So see here, let's just look on the left side, the dark blue column. Can you see my pointer? Yeah, okay. So this dark blue, it says that we're using 89.8 MMBTU of heating. So that'd be our gas load. Our cooling load is 9.15 MMBTU. So the dark blue is what the house is doing now, and the light blue is what our goal is after we make modifications to the house. So everything here on the right side, these are the 8 or 9 modifications that we're recommending. So we're going to say for this house, we think you should do an air seal job, and that may cost you around $22.50, and it's going to give you an annual savings of $79. So the energy model is telling us if you improve the attic insulation from R25 to R49, this is how much energy savings you can expect. I'm sorry, that's for the air seal. If you do the insulation, similar, and so forth. So you go through all these, we estimate about what we think it'll cost and what the energy savings will be. So in this case, the estimated savings for all of this stuff is going to save you $761 per year. Okay. So remember when I showed you that picture of the attic and the insulation was not uniform, and we said our best guess was R25. Well, the walls are the same way. We might guess that it's 2x4 construction. It's probably R13, and we might plug R13 into the model. But there's probably lots of gaps here and there. Maybe there's places where it was never insulated at all, but we can't see because we don't have X-ray glasses. Now we can. There's ways we can kind of peer into the walls using thermal cameras, but in general, it's not a perfect R13. Same thing with windows. We can take our best guess at what the U values are, the windows, and so forth. So this is why we like to use the utility bill calibration and help the model calibrate itself. So this is an example of what the Evergy bills were for 12 months at this house. And we're able to plug those numbers into the energy model. Same thing for the natural gas. And keep an eye on that $761 per year. The new model, after calibrating, we're only going to save $528 per year. So it kind of hurt us, but it hurt us in a good way. It's giving us more truthful, more accurate information. So a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, we made all these improvements for the house, but we didn't get the energy savings we thought we were going to get. And this is part of the reason is the energy models aren't perfect. They're modeling it as best as it can. But there's just deficiencies that the auditor can't see. And so this helps to calibrate the model. It also helps calibrate for how the family operates the house. Maybe they don't turn the thermostat down that far in the summer, so they're saving energy by keeping the thermostat hot. You can't model that without knowing how they operate it. Maybe it's a family of 8 kids and they're running laundry constantly every day, so that's going to increase your energy use. You can't model that without knowing those things. So the energy bill calibration helps us a lot. So here they are side by side. Without calibration, we were going to save $761 per year. With energy bill calibration, we're only going to save $528 per year. So we're going to throw that one out and use the better number. Okay. So let's go back to more specifics here. So in the attic air seal job, we're going to seal the attic, all the penetrations of the ceiling. We had a blower door number on this house, and we were going to have a goal of improving it by 50%. The attic insulation, we're going to improve the attic insulation by, we're going to vacuum it all out, number one, so we can air seal the ceiling better. This house had an attic fan. We're going to remove it completely and seal that opening shut. And that'll let us seal everything and then blow back in new, fresh, uniform layer of insulation that's a good R49. This house has a crawl space. We're going to encapsulate that crawl space. So improve that's going to help us on our blower door also. And we're going to insulate those crawl space walls. The cooling system and heating system, we're going to replace the existing gas-fired furnace with a high-efficiency gas-fired furnace and we're going to replace the 13 SEER AC with a 16 SEER. Okay. We're going to seal the ductwork better and insulate it better. So we had ductwork in the attic and in the crawl space. We're going to seal it and insulate it. We're going to upgrade the windows. And then we're going to take all the utility rebates and tax credits we can. And that's what all these numbers are adding up to being our $26,814. And the approximate savings, this total column here was the 528. Okay. Go back here. Other thing to note here on the left side here, the dark blue in these circle pie charts, the dark blue is electricity and the light blue is natural gas. And if we make all these improvements, our electricity becomes a higher percentage of the load than the gas. So that also affects what our energy bills are going to look like. So it's going to take quite a few years for $528 per year to pay for $26,000 in investment. So you might think, well, can we do better than that? So you might have a discussion with the energy auditor, or I might have a discussion with myself as I'm sitting here at the computer analyzing your house and say, I bet we could do a little bit better if you're willing to electrify. So you might have heard the term electrification. To do that, we're going to, instead of using the high efficiency gas furnace, we're going to go heat pump and go do a cold temp heat pump that can handle our cold winters. In this house, the water heater had already been switched out from a gas-fired water heater to a heat pump water heater. And the only other gas appliance left was the kitchen stove and oven. So this homeowner, if they wanted to electrify, they could use the heat pump and then switch out their oven with an electric oven. And what that does for us, it changes this pie to be 100% 100% electricity and no gas. And what that does for us is it improves our carbon dioxide picture, but it also lets us cancel our gas bill completely. So in the summer months when we're not using much gas, we're still paying $30 a month, just minimum charge. So I can save $360 a year just on killing my gas meter. And this helps us by making our total estimated savings per year $688. Still going to take a while to pay off that $26,000 investment, but that's that's the better picture. So any questions on that?
The um, changing out the furnace to this heat pump type unit, is that a ground source heat pump or is that an air source type heat pump?
This would be an air source for this house in the middle of a suburban area. It'd be difficult to drill the wells, so we usually don't recommend those unless you've got, more of a rural area. So yeah, this would be air source heat pump. This particular model is based on putting air handlers in that encapsulated basement and ducting to floor registers in the house and getting rid of the unit that was in the attic so it can be air sealed better.
And then that total cost is excluding incentives, it says, and you've got over $5,000 in incentives you're showing there. So that helps too.
Yeah.
And the stove, would you recommend like an induction stove, or would you recommend just a resistance stove, or a stovetop with induction? Or
I would have a conversation with you as the homeowner, encourage you to try out induction. I've heard great things about it. Some people I know that have used them say they would never go back. They love them. They do cost a little bit more, but they just have lots of advantages, not just in cooking and just in electrifying, but it's also safer because a child can't burn themselves by touching the surface, things like that.
And you can really control the temperature extremely well. So.
Mm-hmm. And there's options there. I've also seen just induction countertop stoves. You could try them out before you invest in the whole ball of wax, see if you like it. So there's that too.
One thing I just wanted to pipe in and kind of point out a couple things about Paul's energy audits here. Just like he was saying, I've done some research on ways that on other ways to get energy audits done, and also load calculations too. If you're a HVAC guy like Eric, you'd be happy to know that this thing will spit you out a load calculation as well. It's not an official manual J, but it will tell you how big of an HVAC system does your house need. And when it comes to this energy model and the load calculation and the energy savings and everything, I don't see how we could possibly get any more accurate than this. We're using a real site inspection, a real blower door air leakage number, and real energy bills. I don't think you can, as far as accuracy goes, it'll never be perfect. But I don't think you can get much better than this. The other thing that I just wanted to, you can see the SIR there, the savings to investment ratio. The basics on that is that if it's 1 or more, then it's like a good investment, and if it's less than 1, it's not a great investment for your money. On that note, frankly, in Kansas City, we have relatively cheap energy. So a lot of these things aren't necessarily going to pay for themselves. But like Paul said at the very beginning, like a lot of these choices are emotional. And, we call the company Endeavor Home Performance instead of Endeavor Energy Efficiency, because it's not just about energy efficiency. These things will lower your energy bills. They may not pay for themselves just financially, but they're also going to make the house more comfortable, more healthy, more durable. You're going to live in a happier house, and also your bills will be lower. Will they be so much lower that you're going to save yourselves, a ton of money, and it's going to be better than investing in the stock market? Probably not, but you'll also, live in a better house.
Couldn't you also say that the resale value of the house goes up to the point where, at least when the current owners move out, they would perhaps recoup that investment at that point?
Absolutely. And that gets into an even broader conversation of trying to get the value out of energy efficiency upgrades at real estate transaction time. But I think a report like this could absolutely help you do that. You could provide the potential buyers with this report and say, here's what we did, and here's our energy bills, and check out how low they are.
This particular energy audit does not give you a HERS score on your house, but that's a separate software we can run, and it's a similar process where you enter all these different variables into the software, and it'll spit out what is the HERS score, and then that's a pretty valuable number you can share with your realtor when you're selling your house. Like, a HERS score of 100 is lousy, but a HERS score of 50 is awesome. And you can brag on that and say, this house has a really good HERS score, and so it should be worth more. The other thing is, if you've done a lot of improvements on your home, people can tell when they walk in your house. Prospective buyer, they can tell. And if they get a home inspection, the inspector will be able to tell that, hey, this family is really taking good care of their house. They've done a lot of really smart improvements, and it'll just, I think, help. Intangibles are going to show up during the selling process, and it may help you sell at a better selling price, but also just more likely to get people to want your house because they can tell it's been well kept.
Is there a maybe an advantage also to looking at the addition of solar at this point when you're doing an energy audit?
Yeah, the energy audit in this example, we did not recommend solar. The homeowner wasn't interested in that, but that is a line item we can add, and it'll also affect that electric piece of the pie over there and make it lower for sure. Yep.
And real quickly on electrification, since you kind of mentioned that, you put in a heat pump and you electrify your house, the more electric stuff you have, the more benefit you get from solar panels. So, I always, when people start talking about solar, I recommend to them, I guess it's a little bit backwards in a way. I recommend, first of all, work on your house envelope, because you don't want to buy more solar panels than you need to. Why don't you, invest in the insulation first, and bring down the amount of energy that you're using. But then, sort of backwards in a way, let's maximize the amount of electricity we're using, because if we're buying solar panels because we think that the solar panels are going to have cheaper electricity than the utility, let's maximize the amount of electricity we're using, which maximizes the amount of money that we're saving by having solar panels.
Thanks for the questions, John. Anyone else?
Everybody's quiet now. All right. Well, thank you very much, Bryton and Paul. That was I got a lot out of that. I really did.
That's what we'd like to hear.
You're welcome.
Well, that was a lot of information. Thank you so much. I had the question earlier about the carry forward on the tax credits, but you answered it. So
I was learning some of that stuff myself.
Well, it's complicated, really, but if you use it a lot, then it gets less complicated.
Yeah, and and that kind of brings up the point here that, if you're interested in an energy audit, you can find our information on the website. Google Endeavor Home Performance. The website is endeavorhp.com. We'll get you set up with Paul. He can come out, do that energy audit for you. You'll get a report that looks just like that. And, once you get that report, you are free to, DIY it or call contractors yourself. Or you can use Paul to help you kind of manage your project, put together the contractors that we trust, and figure out how to maximize your tax credits.
Excellent. Yeah, you were talking about the other benefits besides just lower utility bills, and we used to do energy audits, and we would go back and ask people, after they made the improvements, well, did you save money? And they'd go, oh, I don't know, but boy, my house is so much more comfortable, and we can use the second floor, and my wife can walk around in her bare feet, and she doesn't mind anymore, and everything is just, our house is just so much better. The other benefits are really what people notice more than the utility bills. But then also, I wanted to say that Metropolitan Energy Center completed a study with Children's Mercy Hospital, and they have a study that you can see on their website now, but it shows that homes that did get weatherized and got air sealing and insulation done to them had a reduced risk of childhood asthma. It had better indoor air quality, and the childhood asthma in those weatherized homes dropped significantly. It was like 34% lower incidence and lower incidence of the severity of any attacks. And they said it didn't matter when the house was built. It was older houses, it was newer houses, it was, all kinds of houses, over 5,000 addresses, if I'm remembering right. But so it was, that's a pretty good reason right there to fix up your house. Makes it a lot healthier.
Older people they need a nice environment too.
That's true. We do.
Weaker all the time. No, seriously, the cleaner the environment in your home, the better, right? So I don't know if anybody would argue with that.
Yep, absolutely.
It's been nice having you guys talk. I mean, thank you so much.